Do you know, I actually quote a doctor who says, who also works on a college campus, and says the most frequently prescribed medications to students on the college campus are birth control pills and antidepressants.
Wow.
She says that's not a coincidence.
Wow. Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of The Naked Gospel. It is our vision and hope to see a revival of sexual integrity and dignity throughout the entire bride of Christ. To that end, we bring on guests to discuss issues around sexual ethics, marriage, sex trafficking, pornography, and everything in between. I am your host, Shane O'Neill. Today, I am joined by Professor Nancy Pearcey. She is professor and scholar at Houston Baptist. She is a wife, a mother. She's a best-selling author. And she was also a student of Francis Schaeffer, which is probably one of the coolest introduction pieces I've been able to have thus far. So I'm looking forward to it. Thank you for joining us. Nancy, thank you for being here. How are you?
Thank you. Thanks for having me, and I'm doing well. Thank you.
Good. So glad. I've loved your work for a long time. In grad school, I had this teacher named Dr. David Baggett, and he introduced us to your work, and we worked through Love Thy Body in a sexual ethics class that I had with him. And so we just went page by page, chapter by chapter through the whole thing, and it was an awesome journey. So just really thankful for what you do.
Do you realize that David Baggett is coming to Houston Baptist University, where I teach?
I have heard that. Yeah, he's become a close friend, as well as just a kind of a teacher, mentor, big brother to me. So yeah, I heard the news, and I'm excited for him. It's been a long time coming, honestly.
Yeah, well, we're really looking forward to it as well. He'll be here in the fall.
Yeah, you guys have an awesome staff down there. It's just getting bigger and bigger. Honestly, it's a beautiful school. How long have you been there?
This is my 7th year.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah, I'm really enjoying it. It's a good school.
Yeah, I believe it. So I would love to just jump right in if you're okay with it.
Yeah, in fact, let me give you an opening.
Yeah, do it.
Today, I read an article on how, because of the lockdown with the coronavirus, online pornography is booming.
Yeah.
The article was in a publication called The Federalist, if you want to check it out. But it said online sex performers report that business is booming. So this is a very time-sensitive issue.
Yeah, very much so. I know that first it was Italy, then Spain, then France. But as they went on lockdowns, Pornhub in sequence started giving them unlimited premium access to all of their content. And at this point, it's a global 1-month free premium membership for the world. And so you've seen that huge spike with pornography, and that's kind of like in the backdrop of them getting some really ugly press, because I guess a lot of sex trafficked individuals have been sponsored or uploaded onto their platforms without any kind of policing or any way to regulate their age or anything like that. So they're definitely looking for good press in the midst of this, and the isolation is lending itself in that direction. Yeah.
Right. And your first question that you sent me was, can we help Christians understand what the secular view of sexuality is? So that, I'm glad you're asking that, because a lot of times we just jump into giving a Christian view, and our young people, including young people in the church, are picking up the secular view from the surrounding society. So I really think the church needs to get ahead of the curve and helping young people understand where these ideas are coming from, instead of just giving them Bible verses. What are the secular views? And the hookup culture today is very widespread, and both not just university campuses, but among non-university young people as well. And I start my chapter in Love Thy Body. Thanks for mentioning my book. Yeah. I start the chapter with an anecdote where I was speaking at a local church to a young adult group. And afterwards, about half a dozen young men gathered around, and they literally said, "Now would you give us a talk on how to date?" How to get a date. Yeah. And it turned out that these 20-some young men had never had a date. And they had never, the They never just spent one-on-one time going to a movie or having a dinner with somebody of the opposite sex. And that was kind of a wake-up call for me, because what's happening is the hookup culture, the message they're getting from the hookup culture is fun means engaging in physical relationship in a physical relationship without any emotional attachment. And so the rules of the game are you're not to become emotionally attached, no relationship, no commitment, no exclusivity. The script is you are supposed to be able to walk away from a hookup culture, hookup encounter. You're supposed to be able to walk away as if it never happened. And in Love Thy Body, I give a lot of quotes from college students because they know the script all too well. There was a young woman named Alicia who said, hookups are very scripted. You learn to turn everything off except your body. You make yourself emotionally invulnerable. And another college student named Naomi said, people assume that there are two very distinct elements in a relationship, one sexual and one emotional. And they pretend that there are clean lines between them. So both of these young people are picking up the notion that I'm supposed to be able to totally detach who I am as a whole person from what I do with my body. And that split is really the theme of my book, Love Thy Body. It's, how does this split play out in various areas, not just sexuality, but homosexuality, transgenderism, and so on. It turns out that that's that kind of the idea that you can split your body from who you are as a person is what's driving so many of these issues.
Yeah, I loved how you played out even some of the logic in the secular sexual ethic of the person who gets hurt is a victim. And so having sex without feelings means that you're empowered, and you played out some of that logic, which was just so helpful about like kind of this victimhood mentality and also this empowered mentality that are really big themes in our culture right now. And so then people divorce themselves from their emotion because it means that, that they're empowered because they don't feel when they get hurt in those moments.
Yeah, I quoted a researcher named Donna Freitas, and she did a very large study of college students and went around the country talking to college students. And she said, of course, young people have a hard time actually splitting their body, what they do with their body from their emotions. They have a hard time with it. And when really pressed on a private, personal level, many of them say they don't like the hookup culture. And they feel confused, they feel frustrated, they feel hurt. But then they say, you can't admit that. If you admit that, it's like you were saying, if you admit that you're emotionally hurt by the fact that this person took sexual advantage of you and then disappeared, if you admit that hurts you, then you're needy. These are the words that are used. You're needy, you're clingy, and you haven't gotten the third wave memo on the memo on third wave feminism is how one student put it.
Yeah.
The third wave, it used to be feminists were they were against pornography and they were against promiscuity, but third wave feminism is embracing it. It's saying we can be just as raunchy as men. We're pro pornography and we're pro prostitution. They're just sex workers like everyone else. So the mentality has shifted, but again, in her research, this researcher found that most young women, they're scared to death to admit it. It started with a course she was teaching. Halfway through up until about halfway through the course, all the young people were claiming to love the hookup culture. It was so liberating. And then finally, one student started to admit, I don't really like this. And then the whole class started admitting, we don't like this either. Nobody really thrives on casual, meaningless sexual encounters. We were not made that way. We were created for sexuality to be part of who we are as whole persons, with a whole person interaction with somebody else. And when we have sex, we really are not looking for just a physical reaction, sex as recreation. We really are yearning for some deeper connection with another person. So in our hearts, we're made in God's image. And so in reality, we all are hoping to reach out and form some sort of a bond with another person.
Yeah, that's well put. I think the same method can be easily applied to pornography, where people often think that they can go into a room and do this by themselves and it won't impact any other area of their life. But like when you're giving so much passion to just pixels, to just nothing, and then you go out throughout your day and you expect that not to touch the other areas of your life, there's less passion and less, well, it changes your moral imagination and how you view people, how you approach them, how you love them, how you hold them. All those things just play out. And so I think your method has been helpful across the board for hookup culture, porn culture, and seeing the connection between the two as well.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Pornography is the ultimate in depersonalized sex, in thinking that you can be that you can react to somebody just as a body. And of course, you're treating the woman as just an image. You have no interest in who she is as a whole person.
Yeah.
Pornography is the ultimate. And what's interesting is that even science is supporting the idea that sex is meant to be, is meant to engage the whole person, because the researchers were surprised when they found out that sexual activity releases hormones like oxytocin, vasopressin, they're called the attachment hormones, because they do stimulate a sense of bonding and connection with other people. There's a UCLA psychotherapist who's not a Christian, but she goes through the evidence that we do form a chemical bond when we have sex with somebody. Even if you are trying to have a no strings attached encounter with somebody, in fact, your body does make, one researcher called it, you make an involuntary chemical bond, whether you mean to or not. And this UCLA psychotherapist said, you might say we are designed to bond. And her point was, she wrote a whole book on this. She said, I'm not allowed to tell my students any of this, because I'm not allowed to say anything negative.
Wow.
And she finally wrote a book about it in order to show that sex education as it's taught today, all the way up to the college level, is just about sex as recreation and no training in how to have a relationship. And students are coming to her at UCLA and saying, I quote one student who came to her and said, "Doctor, we're taught all about mechanics of sex and contraception and so on, but why are we not taught what it does to your heart? Why are we not taught how to have a relationship?" She had recently, a boyfriend had recently dumped her, and so she was very depressed. So even the way it's taught in the universities there's no emphasis on the whole person involvement. And so anyway, her point was even chemistry shows us that the biblical view is true, that sex is meant to be part of the whole person.
That's really helpful. And then you see the ugly side of that data of like depression, anxiety, and suicide being higher statistically now than it's ever been in human history. Like more people are lonely and hurting and estranged and relationally disenchanted than like ever before. And so I think across the board what you're saying seems to be true, and you see just the younger generations hurting in big ways.
I actually quote a doctor who says, who also works on a college campus, and says the most frequently prescribed medications to students on the college campus are birth control pills and antidepressants.
Wow.
She says that's not a coincidence.
Wow. That's an intense correlation. That's wild. Yeah. Okay, Nancy, thank you so much for playing that out for us. That gives us a really defined landscape to be able to see what's taking place. So I just want to look now at kind of the counter landscape, as we do see a lot of millennials leaving the Christian ethic for the secular ethic. So maybe just before we even get into like the why of that, like painting out for us what the biblical ethic of sexuality is, how would you articulate that?
Well, let me say one more thing about the secular ethic, because the contrast will be clearer then.
Please do.
The ultimate source of the secular ethic is a materialistic view of the universe. In other words, Darwinian naturalism or materialism, the idea that we're just evolved organisms. Because your ethic always rests on your view of nature. And because our bodies are part of nature. And so how we treat our bodies is defined by our view of nature. And so the reason that sex is cast, as something that's purely physical is because the metaphysics that's being taught in our universities is that we are purely physical, that there's nothing that can't be studied under a microscope. So no soul, no spirit, no moral sense, no free will, really. And today the cutting edge is there's no consciousness. So young people are being taught you're basically just a biochemical machine. You are operating by such stimulus response mechanisms. And the logical conclusion of that is that we are driven solely by pain and pleasure. We're attracted to pleasure, we try to avoid pain. And Freud actually said this. He said we're pleasure machines. We're pleasure machines. And what that means is we can use our bodies any way we want, as long as it maximizes physical pleasure. So we might call this the Proverbs 30 picture of sexuality. In verse 20, it portrays the person who's committed adultery as saying, it says, she eats and wipes her mouth and says, I've done nothing wrong. In other words, if sex is just a natural appetite like eating, you feel sexual hunger, you satisfy it. No big deal. So critics of the hookup culture, which includes a lot of Christians, of course, often say it gives sex too much importance. But in reality, it gives sex too little importance because it treats the body as nothing more than a physical organism driven by physical urges and instincts. So it's treating sex as something isolated from the whole person. Rolling Stone magazine, see, if we can do anything we want with our sexuality, then it has no intrinsic meaning. Which is the logical result of a materialist worldview. It has no intrinsic purpose. And therefore, we impart the purpose. Whatever we want to do with it, we impart whatever meaning we want. That means it's intrinsically meaningless. I quoted, in Love Thy Body, I quoted a Rolling Stone magazine article that in turn was quoting a young man from Austin, Texas. And the young man said, sex is just a piece of body touching another piece of body. It is existentially meaningless. So that's what we have to understand, is that it's not that they overvalue sex, it's that they undervalue sex. They actually have a low view of the body as just a product of mindless, purposeless, meaningless forces, and therefore the body itself is purposeless and meaningless. So when we talk about the Christian ethic, people will appreciate it more when they realize that it's not just don't do it, it's wrong, it's sinful, but it's embrace the high value and dignity of the human body over against this secular view that denigrates the body.
I see, that's really helpful and very winsome. It strikes me that there's an ugly reality an ugly irony even at play with that kind of ideology, with then the existential reaction of the Me Too movement. It's like, hey, like, we want to treat our bodies however we want, but don't you dare violate it, And then all of a sudden, once something is violated, it comes with like deep lacerations upon our souls. So like you can say something isn't sacred all you want, but we all know that when it's violated, we hurt real bad. And the worldview that you just paint out doesn't have any resources to be attentive to like the soul in those ways because they deny its existence. But people are really beat up and they don't know what to do with this kind of reaction, this kind of existential reality that they did, is denied in the academic that it even exists.
That's a good point. And it gives us an entree to talk to our secular friends, because when they sense that their view of sexuality is hurting them, like in cases like the Me Too movement, when they sense that treating sex as if it was just a matter of, my seeking pleasure, we can help them to say, okay, you realize that you're trying to live out a worldview that doesn't fit who you are. That you're trying to live out a view of sexuality that is hurting you. And your intrinsic sense actually is in line with the biblical view of sexuality. So we can help people. You talked about Francis Schaeffer at the beginning. One of his forms of apologetics was you don't just tell people what you believe. You enter into their worldview and help them to see that they cannot live by their own worldview. They're not going to listen to your answers until they have questions. And the way you can help them have questions is help them to see that they're not able to live within the confines of their own professed worldview. So whenever we see things like, I like your description there, the contradiction. We do sense the laceration of the soul when we're violated sexually. And we should be able to tell people, that's because the Christian with what you're feeling is because you're made in God's image. You actually do respond in a way that fits the Christian worldview and not in a way that fits your worldview.
Yeah. Which allows for a lot of not just conversational incision of like thought, but also a lot of empathy, where there's obviously duplicity there, but there's also just a lot of brokenness. So I think apologetically, there's a lot of leeway for like truth and love in those moments to be able to just come in and present Jesus to them, Go ahead, sorry.
So maybe that's the entree into, okay, how do we contrast the Christian worldview?
Let's do it. What do you got? Yeah.
Let me start with the direct response to the materialist worldview that says, your body has no intrinsic purpose, so do whatever you want. The opposite of that is the idea that the world does have a purpose. It was created for a purpose. The technical term is teleology, right? That God did create the universe for a purpose, and even science shows that living things operate by a purpose. Very fundamentally, eyes are made for seeing, ears are made for hearing, wings are made for flying, and fins are made for swimming. And in fact, the development of the entire organism is driven by an inbuilt plan or blueprint, DNA. So science itself supports the idea that the universe was created for a purpose. And so what Christians are saying, the Christian sex ethic, therefore, is just saying when we live in harmony with that purpose, we will be happier and healthier. So you asked, and the questions that you sent, you asked about, I remember you used the word redemption. So there's like the scriptures have to say a lot about the body, and a lot about dignity with the body, whether it's Genesis or the cross or Revelation. Like it seems to be a very consistent theme and motif in the scriptures. More often than not, though, our Christian ethics are typically do's and don'ts. But I was wondering if you could paint us kind of a picture or a narrative or whatever, however you articulate a positive apologetic for the dignity of the body with a kind of a biblical sexual ethic. The Christian worldview is often formulated in terms of the sort of great turning points in history, which is creation, fall, redemption. And that gives us a really good tool to analyze any subject, including sexuality. So creation is asking, how did God originally create this? And obviously, if you're ever tempted to think that sex is corrupt or dirty or anything like that, it's important to remember God created it. it was not a result of the fall. God created it, and therefore it's part of what it means to be made in God's image. When Genesis talks about Adam and Eve, it talks about the leaving your husband and leaving your mother and father and cleaving to your wife. And the original command is to be fruitful and multiply. Cultures, creating a culture starts with creating babies.
Yeah.
So this passage is sometimes called the cultural mandate because it's telling us that God's original purpose for human beings was to create cultures, to create civilizations, and sex is part of that, overarching purpose. So it's clear that in Scripture, sex has a dignity and significance of being part of who we are made in God's image. That's creation. The next stage of the drama is fall. It's important when we look at on any subject, we say, what was its original purpose? But then how has it been distorted and damaged by the fall? And so that's where we look at the fact that sex does not often fulfill its original purpose the way sinful humans practice it. In fact, for many people today, it's very hard to persuade them that any form of sexuality is wrong or harmful, because they think, well, if sex has no intrinsic purpose, then I give it its meaning and purpose. And whatever significance I give it is what counts. So I think even Christians fall into that as well, because they tend to think, well, my students will say, isn't it enough that we're in love? And then you have to say, no, that's not the original purpose. It's God's original purpose was that the most ultimate and complete physical union is meant to be an expression of the most ultimate and complete personal union in the whole life commitment of marriage. And just being in love is not the purpose of sex. In a sense, you could say you're lying with your body. If sex means I am committed to you with my whole life, my wealth, my economics, my dwelling place, everything about me, that's what sex is meant to be. So if you use it for anything else, in a sense, you're lying with your body. You're not telling the truth. You're playing a game. You're doing an act. So creation, fall, and then the third stage is redemption. Redemption means how do we work with God, cooperate with God in being a redemptive force in the world? How do we help people recover the original meaning of sexuality? A lot of people think redemption just means I get saved and I go to heaven. And in heaven, I'm not going to have a body anyway. I'm just going to be a soul.
Yeah.
That's not what the Bible teaches. The Bible says at the end of time, God is not going to scrap the material world as if he made a mistake the first time around. He's going to restore it and renew it. He's going to create a new heavens and a new earth. And you and I will be there with restored bodies. From that time of the early church, the Apostles' Creed has affirmed the resurrection of the body. So what we do, that's why what we do with our bodies matters. God cares about what we do with our bodies. He created matter. He created our bodies. They have value and significance. And it's too easy for Christians to kind of get into the notion of, well, it's only the spirit that counts. It's only the spirit that's going to go to heaven. As one of my students put it this way, she said, growing up in the church, I was always taught spirit good, body bad. We have this sort of stereotype that Christians are otherworldly and they don't care about the body. And that's why we have to come back constantly to the idea that the Christian ethic is based on a high view of the body, that it has a value and dignity, and that the Christian ethic is showing us how to honor our body, how to affirm our biological identity and the way God made us. And like I said, even our hormones are part of this, our sexuality. We are to honor the Creator's purpose with our body. And I think a lot of a good starting point, and I find it's a hard one for people. A starting point is is to change our language to positive. That the Christian sex ethic is honoring our body and honoring God's original purpose and living in harmony with who God made us to be. So I think it's very important that we use this positive language, not especially with outsiders, but in the church as well, because a lot of Christians are stuck in the negative, like you said earlier, do's and don'ts. No, we need to communicate the whole worldview that shows sexuality within the drama of creation, fall, and redemption.
That is extremely helpful. Thank you, Nancy. Yeah, it so much in there. The Apostles' Creed to even something like 1 Corinthians 15, like the emphasis on the body and even the emphasis on, Jesus's body, that he came in the body, he lived in the body, he was sentenced in the body, died in the body, and resurrected in the body, and then he's going to come back in the body. It's like what Jesus did with his body matters, and he dignified the body so much. That goes a long way in redeeming the value of our body. That's what redeems the value of our body all the way back from Genesis 1. So I really appreciate you playing that out in much more detail than I'd ever be able to. So thank you. And it also strikes me that like even learning how to use my body in spiritual formations has been a big part of my journey over the last few years, that like there's something beautiful about interacting with the world with your body, that the world isn't, we say it's fallen. And so in that sense, we just assume that it's all desecrated and that it's all just going to burn and nothing will ever come from it. Just what Jesus has done with the body. And so it invites me to use my body to know the world around me, to know the people around me, and really holy and fun expressions. So I love your teaching because it's given a lot of breadth to that kind of living.
Yeah, what I think is interesting is that the early church faced something very similar. They faced an ancient Greek and Roman culture that also denigrated the body, though for very different reasons. The early church faced worldviews like Gnosticism and Platonism and Manichaeism. Remember, Augustine was a Manichae, and all of these isms said this world is a realm of death, decay, and destruction, and therefore it's the source of evil. And in fact, Plato used the term, the body is the prison house of the soul. All the body is imprisoning the divine spark. And the goal of salvation was to escape the body and leave it behind. And in this context, Christianity was nothing short of revolutionary, because Gnosticism even taught, by the way, that there were several levels of deity, and it was the lowest level God who had created this world. It was an evil God, because no self-respecting God would get his hands dirty mucking about with matter. So Christianity said, no, this world is the creation of the supreme deity, a good God. And therefore, the material world is intrinsically good. And the real scandal at the time, however, was the incarnation, the idea that that same supreme deity had entered into the universe, the material world itself, and taken on a physical body. To the Greeks, as Paul puts it, this was foolishness to the Greeks. And so the incarnation was the ultimate affirmation of the value and dignity of the human body. And then, as you put it a minute ago, when Jesus was executed on a Roman cross, he did escape, we might say, the physical body, as Gnosticism taught we should aspire to do. But what did he do then? He came back in a physical body. To the ancient Greeks, this was not spiritual progress. They said, why would anyone want to come back to the realm of the body? And so you're right. Jesus owned the whole incarnation. I was talking to a non-Christian friend who was raised in the Christian church, and she said, that is stunning. You're right. Jesus came back in a physical body. And she was starting to see the impact of that. It's not just a Sunday school story. It means something for how we live today and how we present the Christian ethic as based on a stunningly high view of the body. I have to tell you, Read any other philosophy or religion. There's nothing like it anywhere else. We should be so excited by the positive message we have and how life affirming and how life giving it is that we just can't help telling people about it because we're so happy.
Amen. Yeah, I was talking with he's a fellow academic and writer. His name's Paul Gould, and he was talking about the transcendentals with truth, goodness, and beauty, and how they're painted all around us, and how our conscience, our imagination, and how these faculties within us push us towards these transcendentals, and they're all in the world around us, and like how engaging them makes life worth living, right? And they're reflections, they're mirrors through our creation of God's goodness and His glory and His beauty, and pursuing those things in community makes life worth living. And so I think a lot of that is launched off of the foundation that you just laid, honestly.
Yeah, I like that. I think that being able to focus on the good parts. I mean, we live in a broken world, and there's plenty of evil. And Christians need to be very realistic about the evil. We have the ability to be utterly realistic because we also know what you just said, the transcendentals, and it was created good. It will be redeemed. So we need to always balance a very realistic understanding of the fall and evil with the notion that it was originally good and it will be restored. Yeah.
Amen. That's as good a place as any to start to wind down. So much of me is just itching because you lay out so many stories of like early Christians and like men and women who were slaves and were expected to be sexually active with their masters, and they decided not to, and they would experience horrific deaths because of it, but they didn't want to willfully dishonor their body. But it was it was the martyrdom around the value and the dignity of their own body that ended up renovating the sexual ethic initially of the West. And there were examples like that ended up changing the West in really beautiful ways into the West that we have today, even as it becomes more postmodern and post-humanism, so to speak. But I think some of those stories are incredibly helpful just on a historical level for tracing out how Christianity has impacted the West. So I would recommend your book to anyone, honestly.
Yeah, I think we appreciate Christianity more when we realize how the ancient Roman and Greek culture treated sexuality.
Yeah,
it was absolutely accepted that men would have sex with mistresses, with prostitutes, and most of all with slaves. Slaves had no control over their own bodies. Slaves were completely at the mercy of their masters, and they were regarded as handy sexual outlets, and that's about it.
Yeah.
And when these slaves became Christians, and for the first time, had a sense of moral agency, and the sense of the dignity of being God's people. Sometimes you're right. Sometimes it was hard for the church at first because how would they advise these slaves? Because if they did not have sex with their masters, they would be executed. They would get killed. Masters have the total right to do that.
Yeah.
And as you point out, that did happen to some degree in the early church. And the Catholic Church knows this because they honor their saints. Protestants don't know it as much. But in fact, as you say, some of the most stirring stories of the early martyrs were men and women, mostly women, who said no to that kind of sexual slavery, and were executed for it.
Yeah.
So that we have quite a heritage, and you're right. It changed the way the world sees sex. Eventually, the Christian view prevailed as the dominant view for a long time. No longer, but it changed the world.
Yeah. Amen. It's both harrowing and beautiful at the same time. And I think those stories are worth reading. Those stories are worth honoring. And it's renovated a lot of my own heart, honestly. Just reading those stories has gone a long way in shaping my imagination when it comes to the value of people and the value of the body. And again, that heritage is so rich. It is worth, well, it's worth exploring. So yeah, I'm with you on all that. Nancy, thank you so much for being with us. You've just been lovely and winsome, and you are a wealth of knowledge and resources, and I'm just really thankful for you. If any of our audience wants to stay in touch with any of your thoughts as you're thinking them, are you writing anywhere, like any books that you would recommend that you've written as a starting place? How can people get more involved with the thoughts of Nancy Pearcey?
Well, we've talked about my book, Love Thy Body, but I do have several other books, as you can see behind me.
Yeah.
My son thoughtfully set up this display for today. I thought that was sweet.
Such a good son. Yeah.
But I do have a website called nancypearcey.com, nancypearcey.com. But I'm really mostly active on Facebook. I interact with a lot of people there, and so if you want to connect with me on Facebook, that's another good way to do so.
Yeah, I would recommend that to our audience as well, because you're always interacting with current cultural articles and ideas and whatnot, and you're pretty diligent in that. So I would highly recommend that as well, because yeah, you're pretty prolific when it comes to those kinds of mediums. Yeah. Nancy, thank you again just for being with us. Guys, thank you for tuning in for this. It's been awesome to be with you. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. If you did, would you write us a positive review down below on the podcast? And we'll see you next time. Thanks.